Hi, everybody. My name is Glenn Kaiser. I'm the director of the Dolby Institute. And we're recording this for a podcast conversation. That's a co-production of the Dolby Institute and the Soundworks Collection. I'm really grateful for the chance to have this post-screening conversation about this pretty amazing movie, Uncut Gems. I'd like for our team to come up and join us now. We'll start with re-recording mixer Skip Lievsay. On the end. Composer Daniel Lopatin. Co-writer and co-director Benny Safdie. And co-writer, co-director Josh Safdie. Thank you. So we're mic'd for the recording, but handhelds for the room.
This as well.
Yeah. So before we dive,
you redid the room recently?
We did. We
New-
did
new-
about
new
a
chairs,
year
right?
ago. We made this into like proper Dolby cinema with Dolby Vision projector and
Atmos.
Dolby Atmos
yeah.
sound, which these guys just experienced.
Oh man, so you're the first audience to hear the film in Atmos, aside from us when we were mixing.
Oh, that is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Atmos is incredible. It really is. Like, you have such an ability to like move speaker to speaker even. It's incredible. I remember Skip did one thing like, whoa. It was just like insane, the capability.
Well, I wasn't going to lead with that, but since you brought it up, yeah, I'd love to just kind of dive in and talk about, I think when people think about Dolby Atmos, Mr. Lievsay on the end over here won an Academy Award for mixing Gravity for Alfonso Cuarón. Thank you. And I think that's the kind of movie that people tend to think about when they think about, a Dolby Atmos kind of sound extravaganza. This movie uses Atmos in a very, very different way. So, Josh and Benny, can you talk about, like, why did you guys want to use this technology and what did it do for this film?
Well, I guess we wanted the sound to be very immersive. Like, we wanted a lot of layers of sound, a lot of sound effects, and we wanted the dialogue to kind of feel like you were there. And it was an obsession. And we didn't realize that, like, we only knew of a 7.1, like the speakers that you can have. But then there was this idea that you could take the fidelity of all of this, and then there were ceiling speakers, and you could move things. And just this idea that you could take it to another level. Like all of this stuff we were talking about, but taking it and making it this totally immersive experience with the sound was incredible. So it was like, okay, let's try it. And
Using the language of realism.
yeah, that's the thing. It's taking all of these kind of tricks, but making it so that it just felt more like, oh, this is what it would be like if you were there. The bathroom was on the left, and it sounded like this when it flushed through the walls and stuff like that.
Well, there's in life is not as convenient normally as works of art where you can choose to spotlight certain things, but life unfolds and you take meaning from it as you want, and you can focus and so we wanted to kind of hint at that. There's a great story. Altman kind of famously pushed sound in incredible ways, and before the technology was even there, it would have been amazing to have seen Altman use Atmos. So it would have just been special. And I know that
Every person will get his or her own channel.
Well, the story from McCabe and Mrs. Miller is at the premiere. Warren Beatty was sitting next to Altman, and 15 minutes of the movie, he turns to Altman and he goes, "Does the whole movie sound like this?" And Altman looked at me and was like, "Yeah, isn't that awesome?" And Warren Beatty was like, "Oh, I don't know if I'm ready for this," because Altman knows that life is not movies shouldn't be. It should reflect life in that regard, that it should be, you should have everything, and you should be able to selectively tune things out, but they're still there. And that was what was so cool to work with Skip, and Warren was like, we would sit in the mix room, and we'd be able to watch. I mean, Warren, Skip has an incredible. And just from a mixing, we learned this entire process has been so educational for us because we were lucky enough to be surrounded by like insanely grade A talent, and that was like humbling and strange the entire way, along in the journey. So when we got to Skip's room, we would watch and we would like Hawkeyes. He's like, "You guys sit right here next to me." And it was great. We were sitting right there, and we would there was one particular thing that we loved watching Skip do is the way he used reverb in a room and letting it map peaks with people screaming and stuff. So the way he's working within realism, and you're listening to it through the fidelity of so many speakers, and it just, like Benny's saying, it became an immersive experience. That was
you guys were doing something in a fashion I'd never really seen in a movie before, and I got to see the movie for the first time at Telluride a few weeks ago, which I think was just it was 7.1.
5.1. I don't even think.
Oh, was it 5.1?
Yeah, I think it was
But I found myself getting really tense in the first like 10 minutes of the movie. And because I wasn't able to get everything that was coming at me, and I was really straining, and I was getting really like very tense. And then I realized I'm just gonna have to let go of this and kind of let it wash over me and kind of take what I can get. And I think that was a really powerful kind of conscious decision on your part. I would love for you guys to talk about.
It was tough. We actually had to go back and we worked on it, I think, a little bit since. We've done some more mixes. There's so many elements. You have score, you have a lot of background dialogue, you have a lot of SFX, and you have spotlight dialogue. So we went back since Telluride actually and did even more work on it. So.
Well, we toned it down a bit.
Yes.
Made it more intimate, as Skip said.
Well, there was like a din that we had because we recorded a bunch of ADR to add to the scene so that you could have these people talking, and it became, with the din that we had from the location, it wasn't quite working. We weren't really hearing it, but then we could actually isolate all these people in the background a little bit more, so it actually made it more of what we were going for.
Well, I remember we sent Scott Rudin and Eli Bush the ADR script. It was like 45 pages. We didn't.
It was not necessary.
That's pretty crazy.
It wasn't necessary. It wasn't like we had all this looping that we had to do because it was all background and creative, and we were given. That was what was incredible about this production is we were allowed to do it. So it's like, oh wow, we can actually go and record. So we really took, we pulled on the rope until there was no slack left.
The scene with Kevin in the showroom, we brought in his friend Dash, who is in the scene, but we just literally played the scene back for him and said, okay, imagine you're in that showroom and just comment about things that you see, comment what Kevin's doing, and then he made himself Kevin's best friend in that whole session. And so he's in there now. He's in there a lot, and I just remember doing when we were cutting the ADR, which is he's through the entire scene, and it was.
And then on top of it, on set, we don't stop. We let, if you and I are doing the scene together, like let's say
we would
Sandler
still be
and
talking
Lakeith,
also. And
we would let everybody talk freely who aren't, and we're not like screaming action. So most people on the set don't even know that we've started filming.
That you're actually
so
rolling,
there's just people talking and being themselves, and that sound is baked into your dialogue on the boom tracks because they're just talking in the room. So you have that in addition to the ADR, and then we bring it to someone like Skip. We're like, help us make.
And we
sense
wouldn't
of this.
and we were very adamant, don't get rid of the boom track.
Yeah.
We are using all of them.
So Skip, you've got all this massive material that's coming your way. Where do you start?
Well, it's a bit of a detective job, but thankfully I had these two detectives working with me, and they're both very, very savvy. They look at my session. I work in Pro Tools, so I have a Pro Tools in front of me, and they know exactly what's going on. So everything I do, they're like, no, just a little bit to the left. Yeah, that little bit there, So it was like a three-headed monster attacking all these tracks. And we had really good coverage in most cases. We had a boom track, sort of a room mic, but we also had lavaliers, radio mics on almost every line. So we could mix and match, and we could do a really interesting balancing act between the very sort of dryish radio mics and the very warm and reverberant boom mics. So it was really, Bob Altman would have loved what we were doing. He probably would have asked us to put more stuff in. As I worked with Bob a couple of times, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and there were usually around 24 tracks of stuff going on in the busier scenes, and they're all scripted lines as well. So it's kind of like my friend Alfonso Cuarón as well, where as much stuff as you can have happening, let's let it all happen and then sort it out from there. So let's go too far and then back off.
I wanted to ask you, Benny, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday. I'm really fascinated by the first 10 to 15 minutes of a movie and the choices that filmmakers make to kind of where to start the story, where to get the audience into it. One of the things that for me is super exciting about the sound design and the music on this film is all these pieces contributed to make me feel incredibly uncomfortable. And it really kind of gave me the experience of what Howard's life must be like from just an acoustic standpoint. So I wanted to ask you guys about like how did you go about setting the language of how you're gonna tell this story in the first 10 minutes, and how you worked with Daniel on the score and Skip on the sound effects.
I'd just like to say off the bat, I find it to be very comfortable, and I take.
That's because you have problems, Josh. Thank you, Dan.
Well, there's comfort in knowing where everything is for us, even though it's a lot. For us, it's like, oh, it's all there. It's great. It's like you can keep track of it all.
I find myself I'm happiest when I'm overstimulated and there's a lot going on and I can move it at that speed a little bit. That's when I'm like I guess I'm happiest when I'm not thinking about when I'm distracted. What?
No.
Oh, sorry.
We're all agreeing over here.
Yeah. That is, and I will say that from working on a score point of view, that was something that was kind of a barometer with Dan was chasing this kind of ineffable, almost insatiable sound that made us feel. And with the previous movie we did, the score was kind of a pulse. It was kind of just something that was kind of ever present, and it would come in and out. And we were looking at it from more of like a new age, the way new age music is looked at is from a medicinal standpoint.
Right.
And so in the beginning, yes, we did introduce, but what's funny is that I find that the audience is on edge with the film, as they should, because it's a thriller. But a lot of the music that we're using is taking inspiration from meditation music and like
in terms of the instrumentation and stuff, it feels like
the
it should
whole-
be very soothing.
the
right?
whole
Yeah.
opening 2.5 minutes of music is inspired by chakra music, by music that is supposed to evoke, certain parts of your chakra. Literally, like that's what that's what we were listening to. And Dan, we were trying to replicate this thing called a space bass. And that was funny, like with Skip, like, oh, it's the track called Space Bass. He's like, sure it is. It's called the Space Bass track. And so that was the first 2 minutes of music, and then that leads you into obviously Howard's colon, and then it dumps you off into this like prog, almost there's a lot of live instruments and that is, and all the different instruments are kind of somewhat suggesting towards all the different elements of this story.
Yeah.
So that is, and then add to it all the sound design.
Well, yeah, it's funny as you're saying that. I remember it was just recently we were back when we were tweaking the mix. Skip's like, well, what do we do about this jackhammer that's in the background? And it's like, there's literally, we added a jackhammer to the scene where he's on the phone, and there's the FDR going on in the background, and there's the music, and there's his lines.
You were
So it's like-
obsessed with the FDR in the background.
I was obsessed with that. There was something about it's because there's certain kind of ineffable sounds that you hear while you're in the city. This like whooshing of cars on a highway that you can catch just very faintly in the background. And it was always just like, I thought that was very important for where Howard lives. That sound is always there, almost like white noise, like boom, 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 and then you have these
But
sirens.
that's what we do in New York. There's so much noise
Yeah.
that we all drown out at any time. Anyone who lives in any city, and then you go to like, a rural place, and that silence is scary because it's just like, where's my bed? Where's my acoustic bed? I mean, I'm losing my hearing. I'm like, I've accepted that. I'm not even allowed to be part of the tech checks anymore. That's why I wasn't here. Because I just said louder, louder. And then I remember we were teching Good Time at Cannes, and I was just like,
It doesn't go any
I was
higher.
so angry. It's like, I can't hear it. Like, it's really loud. And then I remember one of the French people there, they were sitting there, they were getting angry at me because I was like, has to be louder, has to be louder. So I'm just not a part of these things anymore. So because I just, to me, a volume knob is just on or off. You know what I mean? There's no.
It's at 100% or zero. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I love about working with Skip is you just go in there. It's loud all the time. There's no like, let's listen to
That's
it
my
at a
style.
damn volume. Yeah.
But it's part of the great tradition of filmmakers who don't have very good hearing, bossing everyone around during the mix.
Yeah.
It happens a lot.
Daniel, can you talk a little bit about? I noticed there was a credit in the end credits for Moog. Can you talk a little bit about how you built the score?
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, I think to their credit too, when nothing is ever what it seems with these guys. So they say new age, but what they really mean is like an opus that keeps changing, and they have very specific notes about what should happen, even in terms of like a melodic progression. So the mood might start with some kind of inspiration like that, but then when you get into the nitty gritty of like a moment to moment, you have such intricate directions. It's really quite like being directed. And even when we had musicians in the studio and we were working with percussionists, singers, saxophone player, flute, when Josh was there, he was basically like he was on set, and he was really engaged.
I felt the same stress that comes with being on set.
Interesting.
I did. I would look at the performer and be like, "Oh, this is the clay. This is the clay. Wherever I have to direct." It was stressful actually. I actually didn't because when you get to that part of the process, you thought that's in the background. You don't have to. Shooting a movie is terrible. So like you gotta you're like, oh man, I'm back where I was.
Finally, we're in post, and
yeah,
now we're
Exactly.
back
Sorry, I
on
didn't
set.
cut you off.
No. But it actually, I think it kind of helped. I could see that it helped them, and it was interesting.
So you've worked with him in the past, right? On previous films.
Moog?
Yeah.
Or us?
Oh, with
yeah.
Moog. Sorry,
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
answer your question about that.
But well, we can come back to that. But at what point did you get involved? Were you talk with these guys before shooting? Were you feeding them stuff during cutting? Like how did the
We'd been,
time
yeah,
go?
we'd been, I remember we were kicking around ideas for the score, like going back to the early winter. And I was sending you like Jerry Goldsmith unused score for Alien Nation and all this stuff that was like orchestral, but it had synth elements. And that was actually something that somehow the spirit of that kind of continued, even though we kind of attacked it from all these different angles from cue to cue. But we had been discussing in the winter, and then I went off and I wrote some like kind of almost like library music. It sounded kind of like 70s European library music with flutes played on mellotrons and very sweet things. And I thought that was going to be the mood. And then I was like, well, that's just chapter 1. So we just kind of kept circling back and back until we had no more time left, and it was May, and it was time to finish it.
But Moog was cool because they
Yeah.
would send. That was amazing. It was like magic to me. We'd be chasing this one sound, and then Dan would get on the phone with Moog, and they would send him email him a patch to put into the new Moog 1.
Yeah,
That was so foreign to me. I was like, hey, sending a patch.
It was crazy. Yeah, it was very serendipitous. I would imagine it's like that with certain lenses or something you have access to, or like hitting up Kodak. But that's how we got very lucky. I started this. Actually, it was through Reiichi Sakamoto introduced me to someone at Moog, and we just started talking about music, really just back and forth about the history of the company. I would never used Moog stuff because I was always using Japanese synths.
And I think for people who don't know, Moog obviously is one of the very first music synthesizers. And I think most people really associate it with 1970s kind of music or Close Encounters.
I have a great anecdote that Isao Tomita told me about. He was one of the first people to buy the original Moog. He went to upstate New York, I think Buffalo or Rochester.
Wherever Cornell is.
And he bought one of these machines. No one had any idea how to use it, but he was obsessed with a Japanese guy. Brought it back. It was a big machine. Flew it back to Japan. Customs is like, what is this? He's like, it's a musical instrument. They go, make it play. He goes, I don't know how to yet. And they're like, well, then until you can prove that it's a musical instrument,
It's going to sit right here.
It's staying in customs. So he took the manual back to his office, studied it, came back 2 weeks later. He's like, all right, I got it. Bunch of patch chords and all that stuff like that. And then he was like, all right, you ready? And they were like, get it out of here. So then he brought it back, and then it had no memory. So that he had to keep, so all the work he would do, he'd have to keep it on. And Yellow Magic Orchestra would be the people during the daytime while he was at night. But that just shows you this thing was like an alien object for humans to use.
And it pretty much still is.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't think Bob Moog, who's the creator of the instrument, even really intended on it becoming kind of this, part of musical culture. I think he really was kind of trying to. He was a scientist. He was experimenting with this machine, and actually it was his partner who basically said, you know what, if we attached a keyboard to this thing, it would be a lot more useful. And he was like, well, how are you going to do that? He goes, well, let me go to the hardware store, I'll get a doorbell, and let's see how a doorbell works, because that's kind of like what happens when you press a key. You depress your finger on it, you hear something, you take it off, and it stops. That's a doorbell. So it's basically one giant, really complicated doorbell that makes sounds. And years later, and I never used Moog because, I typically play chords with my left hand and a lead with my right. And the Moogs are monophonic, means you can only play one note at a time. So it was never that useful for me. And I wasn't like in a prog band where I would like shred a Moog with one hand and play, I'm not that good. So finally it was this big moment for them where they were coming out with the polyphonic instrument, so you could have multiple voices played at once. And so I said I would love to try to play this. They sent it to me, and then that was right when we started writing the score. These guys would come in and see this crazy keyboard on the wall.
So intimidated, right?
Yeah, and so it was fun. It was basically just fun. It was there. It was new, and some of the sounds that they had designed as presets to be shipped with this keyboard were actually just really beautiful. A lot of the pads and atmospheric stuff, it was really what we were going for in terms of the sort of like cosmic.
Was it 1874 with that pad?
There was all kinds of, there was a million sounds that drew us into this kind of like cosmic world, which was, helpful to play off of when we would play more specific progressions on an electric piano or a flute or whatever it was.
Skip, this is a question for you. I think when we introduced Dolby Atmos in 2012, and I think one of the things that kind of surprised us was the people who actually embraced it first and fastest were the music departments, as opposed to the sound effects departments, which kind of surprised us. But one of the things that we noticed was that music mixers were pulling the music off of the screen into the first couple of sets of surrounds and just barely into the overheads, just to kind of create some space and also get separate from the sound effects and the dialogue that were on the screen channels. But I was sitting in the back today, and I was really kind of struck by how much separation there was in the music and how much the various elements that you were positioning around in the 3D space. And so can you talk a little bit about the way you two worked together and how you mixed Daniel's score and decided on placement in the room?
Well, it's true. That's what we did basically, is pull some of the sort of more full-bodied sounds that Dan gave us from the left, right, and push them out into the room and into the ceiling speakers. And then there were a lot of other instruments that were more sort of virtuoso solo voices, and those we could pan around the room and get some real movement out of those sounds. So we had plenty of stuff to work with from Dan, and not very much time. So we kind of came with a little pattern that everyone was happy with, and we just stuck with it until we got to, until everyone was happy and excited. And I will tell you that many composers don't like that pulling it off the screen thing. And the reason is, part of the real world, is that not all the theaters have high quality sound systems in the Atmos system. And generally, the speakers behind the screen are more high quality and more expensive and bigger and more powerful than the Atmos speakers are. So the composers are blanched when you say, oh yeah, we're going to pull it off the front screen so there's more room for dialogue and sound effects. And they're like, no, don't make room for, move the dialogue and the sound effects into the room. So I've had that experience with several composers. So I don't like to do it that way. I like to represent the body of the score on the screen and then move things, important parts of the score out into the room. That's the way we thought it sounded best.
I was really struck by the sequence and I got to ask you about the writing process as you were going through. Did you basically, at every juncture, did you just say to yourselves, what's the worst possible decision that Howard could make right now?
There was no, because that would be like, that would insinuate there
He's
was like a
actually trying to-
Schadenfreude involved in
He's
it, which
trying.
there isn't. There-
He thinks he's coming.
He's
up with the
he's making his
best
best
idea.
effort,
Yes.
right, to get out of this hole. Yeah.
He wants to. I want him to win. You know what I mean? I relate to the guy in a lot of ways. You know, I was saying this earlier that, you know, like when he comes in and his day of his auction, he's wearing his suit, shows up, is that the catalog right there? Yep. He opens it. Stop right on me.
He's so
right?
proud.
Yeah.
That's you spend a lot as a filmmaker. You spend a lot of time on something that's very valuable to you. You put it out into the world. You show up at a film festival in your suit. The catalog is right in front of you. You're like, oh, there's the catalog. And you're like, just like 2 pages, 1 page if you're lucky, and you're just someone immediately raises their hand. This sucks. You know what I mean? Like. But that's life, you know. Everything's very subjective. So like I relate. I don't want those things for him, but I'm being reminded that life kind of does that, especially when you try to cheat life. You know what I mean? You try to like get, you know,
Shortcut.
Yeah, and you know, this movie took 10 years to make. It took 10 years of not being able to make it for many good reasons, not just because we didn't have, you know, a movie that warranted, you know, a bigger budget and things like this, because creatively it wasn't there yet. You know, this was a North Star project. You needed to learn about other things in order to make it, and that really is where a lot of the writing was informed by. It was really just like spending time nurturing it, knowing the character in and out, knowing all of the side characters in and out. I'll tell you, it was this most stressful part of the writing process was the basketball player element, because we started writing it for a different player. We got to know that person, so we got to know him so we could write him. Then he, you know, over 10 years, he's not in the league anymore, and like he grew his hair out, he wouldn't cut it. So then we have to look for someone else. Then that became very difficult, because every time, you know, we would try to go out to a different player, you know, an agent would be like, we'll just do a find and replace for all the names. It's like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
This is a character in the movie. It's not just like one person. And
You got to find their voice.
and you got to find their games, because we're intercutting the real life basketball games. So it was very stressful, because it was a multi-week process with each character change, and then we got to a point where it's like, well, let's meet with different players, and the person we respond to most, and Kevin was just an incredible storyteller, nuanced storyteller who can walk you through a narrative, and feel if you're following everything, and if you're not, he'll address it. And we learned that almost immediately. And I didn't want to get off the phone with him. And then when we met him for the first time, I didn't want to leave. Mostly, I mean,
He's super charismatic.
The first time I met him, I told him, I said, it's an honor to meet you. I hate your fucking guts, because I hated the Boston Celtics more than anything. And I hated him in particular, because he really gets under your skin. But that's the performative side of him. Right. And I got to know him, and he's, you know, a very deep person, obviously, but he knows the storytelling element. So then you start to write, you know, in the passion of Kevin. So then you have to write that into it. So every single element, you really had to. It was a lot. I mean, I'm sure it's overwhelming maybe, because everything is so. I remember when we first met with Idina Menzel, and I sent her. We met with her. She read the script, and I was like, "No, let me send you the character biography." And she's like, "Oh, you know, this is the character biography." She's like, "Well, how much of this is going to be in the movie?" I was like, "Well, all of it, but not really." You know what I mean? And that's so. Those are the things that a longevity project like this actually come to help it. And we're like rewriting it all the time. So it was, you know, it was like Benny was saying earlier, like he told me, it was like, you know, it was like a thread in a sweater. If something was like off, like maybe like, you know, let's say Sibo, one of the producers, Sibo would say, there's something up here, or Rudin would say like, here, raise a flag here. Then you'd pull on the thread to try to fix it. Next thing you know, you got no sweater left.
Yeah.
It's
like,
like, this character references this event on page this, so you have to then you're trying to reorganize, and you're like, it can't move. It's got to stay there. Sorry, it can't change.
So that kind of was the code of the movie.
Yeah.
And that, again, that's why, you know, I think the mix sounds the way it is, that the score feels sometimes, you know, like when she's up in the blade, you have that arpeggiator, just like, you know, that's like the world. It's like, oh my God, I'm inspired right now. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go.
There wasn't an obsession to hear everything. Right. Also, we wanted to that wet kind of synth can't really overpower the the very specific sound that we wanted of the helicopter from the outside, not the inside. You know, there's like
you did something in the edit. So Benny and Ronnie edit together, and I just bother both of them the whole time. And Benny does these these like very intricate sound designs, rudimentary sound
As
designs.
part of the picture cutting process.
We're stupid like that.
certain
We
scenes
can't
don't work unless that's
we can't.
there.
We don't do assemblies. We can't do it. We have to it has to be perfect.
It's got to be fully baked.
So Benny's like doing like sometimes he's doing what's the designer's name?
the
Terminator.
Rydstrom?
Yeah. He's doing 20 sounds for like Howard picking up a pencil, and but it's full body, and you start to get accustomed to it. So I remember during the chase scene when Howard's running out of the school, there was a door. He built this sound.
When Keith opens the door, you'll hear it. I think it's also in Atmos. When he hits that door.
When the car pulls up, Bogosian turns the car around, and
I
then all of a
noticed
sudden
that. Yeah.
the door flies open. It is larger than life.
Oh yeah.
But when I first saw it, I remember with Ronnie, you showed it to us.
Yeah.
We were just like, oh, it was so visceral, and you really. It's the sound that you would remember if you were being chased by somebody.
Yeah,
You'd be
that's
"Man, this
happening."
big metal door threw open, and this guy who looks like he would tear my head off is
Starts coming at me.
coming after you. Exactly.
I'm really glad that you brought up that sequence because I wanted to talk about it. It's watching it again. It's that whole sequence really stands out in my mind from a sound design and a music standpoint, especially. I'm talking about starting when he's waiting for his kid's performance to start. He sees the guys in the back. He goes and talks to them, and then we meet Bogosian for the first time. And I mean, nobody can do an icy stare like Bogosian.
Talk radio. If anyone hasn't seen Talk radio in
Special
this room,
effects.
please seek it out. It's his everything in my opinion.
Yeah.
We actually have a reference to it in the movie.
Do you?
Yeah.
It's been too long since I've seen the movie. I miss the reference.
Red Rocket's Red Glare, I think, says, "You're dead, fucker," and we put that right in the beginning of the movie.
That whole sequence, and then of course it ends up with Adam Sandler being put in the trunk of his car in his underwear, and then he loses even his underwear. But from a sound design and a music standpoint, that sequence was just so like it was just unforgiving. Can you talk a little bit about putting the music together for that sequence?
Well, I think that cue in particular was a little bit for us like, oh, cool, this is like a throwback to good time. We know how to do this.
It was the one we
But-
were least worried about.
Yeah, it was like on the list. It was like, okay, well, that'll be fine. But it kind of to me sounds like a very souped up version of the Good Time score. It's even sort of more kind of I don't know. It's less mushy to me. It's more. It's really cut.
Just like we had the benefit of working with Sandler after a 50-city tour of his stand-up, we had the benefit of working with Dan after his tour with Myriad, where he worked with these incredible musicians. One of them included was Gatekeeper, ADR,
Yeah.
who helped build that track.
Yeah, so we collaborated with Aaron David Ross, who's one of the members of this group called Gatekeeper that I met like way back in the MP3 blog days of the mid-O's or whatever. And they were my favorite band. They were great. They were Chicago music school kids. We got in touch. We started talking, and we're all friends to this day. But we had such an insane glut of work that had to be done in such little time that some of the stuff that was a little bit more like, I don't want to say rote, but in a sense it was very much like a utilitarian task. Like, let's at least get some kind of like Tangerine Dream for Sorcerer. Like, let's just get some material in, and then let's kind of make it more bespoke. And Gatekeeper for that cue and for the Mohegan Sun sequence were perfect because in a sense their whole career is like the Good Time score. So they're like really, really knowledgeable and really, really natural with that stuff. So they came in and kind of did like a wireframe.
Yeah.
And then
And
then I worked with it and I kind of tricked it out. But it was an action cue. So you really, really just have to nail those moments, and you have to know when to kind of come down and not show all your cards too fast if you know there's a level, because Ratner obviously is stressed out running, but then it kind of calms down for a second as he's trying to engage a little bit in the car, and then it goes back up again. So
And just to this point, I won't edit the scene with music. I'll edit the scene without just so that it will stand on its own, and then the music adds something else to it. And then also we just kind of, again, Josh mentioned earlier, Skip's reverbs are insane. Like, I don't understand how there's like, you can actually feel like you're in the room all of a sudden. And it's like, again, in that sequence, he goes from this wooden auditorium to a hallway, to a smaller hallway, then he's outside, and then he's in this car, and then he's in a trunk. And each one was like a very...
Has a very distinct acoustic signature.
And another thing that's very Safdie's to me, and I've been binging on Larry Cohen movies because I've been sick for the last 2 days. So I'm watching all these Larry Cohen movies, and I'm like, oh, I can kind of relate to these score moments. But the thing is, like, Larry will just very quickly get out of it. He'll use it as just a way to kind of either cleanse your palate or set you up for a chase, get the stuff moving. But the minute there's dialogue, you're out. Like, you're done. This is not what you guys do. And you have like that expository, the opening sequence of the film is probably 6 or 8 minutes of music. Good Time was like that too. The cue we're talking about right now. The music has to provide the action kind of genre detail, but then it has to somehow persist through the dialogue and not step on it.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky and very interesting approach to genre stuff, I think.
Well, before we open up and take a couple of questions from the audience, I gotta ask, whose idea was it to have the toilet flush in the hallway outside the gym showroom?
That was my idea. Well, we went back because what happened was we went back because we watched it. Like, there's something missing.
Well, all that stuff was a stage.
Yeah.
Everything in his business,
Was all
the hallway
yes.
was all
it was a
set
built
up.
it was a built set.
It was all built set, yeah.
When we watched the movie back, we're like, there's something missing from these places. It doesn't feel real. So we went back. Josh and I went back to the Diamond District and just recorded a ton of sounds.
Benny almost got us killed. He was like, saw these guys speaking quietly on 47th Street, and he dipped his
Tried to
boom
mic
button.
them.
No, it's just like I just
Tried. He stood over and he was
No,
like,
I stood next. No, I did from under. So I kind of just went next to them and I went
yeah,
like
it was
this.
more like that.
And they were having a big conversation in Russian, like about something. And they just looked at
It
me
was
and
about
I said, "Yeah."
president, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And I just remember they looked at me and they said, "Can I help you?" I was like, "Oh no, I'm fine." And I just like, okay, and they just kept talking. And so that's in there. That's actually when Howard's on FaceTime with his son, their conversation is behind them. Because Warren's like, we gotta use them. So Warren put them behind Howard as he's on the phone, and
I remember when we delivered all of those sounds, and
Warren was so excited. He's like, I'm gonna put him in SoundMiner and we're gonna go wild. It's like SoundMiner is this intense searching program where we had to label all this stuff. But with the toilet flush, we're like, when we got to the hallway and we were just recording all these different buzzers, I'm like, wait a second, there's a bathroom in the hallway. You hear the hand dryer.
and you see it,
and you see it.
like
So it's
men's on one of the
that's,
doors.
That's got to be in there. It's like you got to hear the toilet flush, and it was just something that was it was an obsession to make it seem as real as it was, even though it isn't. You don't actually hear all that stuff at the same time.
Of course
but we felt like you should.
I remember there was a thing in New York called the paper bag players, and they do this. They go to schools and stuff like that, and they have the entire auditorium. They do these like sound experiments, and they tell you, I forgot what it was. It was like alligator brushes his teeth or some weird sentence.
Oh, rhubarb and spinach.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Rhubarb and spinach, and they start it off in a
You
weird
do it
way,
right now if you
and
want.
they say, they said we're gonna turn this room into an airport. The little kid, you're like, whoa, and then they do it.
If each
And
one
then-
of you says it right now, you would experience it. If each one of you says rhubarb and spinach at your own pace,
Let's try
at the
it,
same
actually.
time,
That's
yes.
interesting.
So each one of you say rhubarb and spinach, rhubarb and spinach, rhubarb and spinach, rhubarb and spinach. It will, all of you together will create the perfect ambient soundtrack to what it would sound like. So
Of like a din
Of
in
a
an
big
airport.
room. So
So
if you-
they don't want to do it. I
okay,
can
yeah,
tell,
clearly.
yeah.
But no, but it's none of you will stand out. None of you will stand out. I promise.
There it is.
There it is. It's like it reaches a.
It's like, oh wow, there's 1,000 people.
Yeah,
in
it
an
just
airport.
at some point it just hits, and you're like, oh yeah. So it's just the kind of. that everybody
Okay, this
has.
may be the most useful thing you learn for your next film. For your group ADR, rhubarb and spinach.
But
I don't
by the
know.
way-
I don't know if you noticed, but Benny just slipped that reference into. He's actually the boom man
Yes,
as well.
That's right. Yeah, Benny is the boom operator on the movie, Local 52 right here.
Yes.
But I also learned a new thing on this movie. It was called Group ADR or Loop
the
Group.
best loop group.
Yeah, and that was weird. And they were like, they
first
originally
we
asked like,
were-
do you want to be there for it? And I was like, well, what is it? He said, well, we get all these actors together and they just basically
Just
improvise
background dialogue.
select thing, which is important. And they looked at me and was like, you don't want to be there. You don't want to be there. It's going to be a lot. It's intense. But then I wish I was there.
The producers don't want you to be there.
And then I ended up basically creating our own loop groups and our own sessions. So we'd be like, oh, we're booking this person, and then I would be like 8 people to the room and you do this thing. So it was. But yeah, Benny, that toilet flush, Benny became pretty obsessed with.
And then it was also when you're in these showrooms, cell phones are going off. You know, you're hearing this stuff, and it was a very profound thing. When we went there and heard all these new things, it was kind of exciting to be like, oh,
The buzzers.
It
things like that,
had to inform the track.
yeah,
of the
you
film.
found that little high piercing noise
Oh, yeah,
happened.
that
It was
was
an
a-
accident. I was recording as we were walking into a space, and
Well, we went in at one point. We got into this elevator and we pushed every button, and they would just let them record. It was like 8th floor going up, and then we went into this. We just buzzed a bunch of people's things. They said we were with Izzy Aviani, who's a jeweler in the Diamond District, and then this one guy just let us in, and Benny recorded the whole walk-in process. And then we were listening to it. I was listening to it with Warren. I was like, that high-pitched sound. We need that because that's the audio alert that the front door is open. That's how it lets you know it's not closed so that the second one can open. And we added that kind of in the 11th hour. And that really made the space feel real to us.
Yeah, it did feel real. Let's take some audience questions. Yeah, right here in the middle.
Well, first I just wanted to say that I thought this was so incredible, and I was immediately struck by it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel that the film speaks about race and religion and culture in a really interesting way, and particularly about the divide and also the bond between Black Americans and Jewish people. And I was really struck by, towards the end, the scene with Kevin Garnett, and he's confronting Howard about buying the opal for $100,000 and then wanting to sell it for millions of dollars, and then he ends up selling it to a Black person and making a bit of a profit on that. And for me, it was such a powerful and telling situation and scene. And I guess my question is just if you guys could talk a little bit more about just how the film discusses race and religion and Kevin Garnett's character.
Well, I think religion is just like capitalism is one of the great myths that we have to survive. You know what I mean? And I think that the relationship between Black Americans and Jewish Americans is there's a connection there. I don't know the answers to them, but there is some sort of connection there, and it is rooted in early civil rights. NAACP was one of the founders, was a Jewish person, and there was a kinship that was formed over one people seeing another people being oppressed and shut out of society, and feeling like, oh hey, we have to stand up for this. So that there is a bond there, but it's also illusory. You know what I mean? It's not. It is.
It's not the same.
It's very very different. One people can be shut out immediately based on skin color, you know what I mean, or skin tone. So of course they're not the same, but there is a strange connection there, and it's a deep one. And again, I don't know the answers, but it was in the Diamond District. You saw a relationship there, and you saw one that was like, that was symbiotic on some level. It was kind of like, here are the things that you basically try to win your way into society through success, through capitalism, the myth of capitalism, the mysticism of capitalism, mysticism of jewelry in a weird way. And if you go back to early Semitic anti-Semitism, early anti-Semitism is that dealing with money was by the church was considered ugly and disgusting. So only the Jews were allowed to do it in an effort to kind of ostracize them. And they just naturally, the Jewish people just kind of naturally moved towards that and made a profession out of it. But it ended up, and then in modern society, there were a lot of, certain people get shut out, and you think, well, if I'm gonna get shut out, I'm gonna buy my way in. I'm gonna buy these trophies of capitalism and say, hey, I'm here. And there's a moment in the beginning of the movie where Sandler's character says, congratulations to Cash Out from. He's
he made it.
A musician from Atlanta, and he's made it there, and it's like, congratulations, are your parents happy for you, and stuff like that. So there is this sort of like camaraderie of like, let's beat the system together, but it's also like you're selling them shit, and you know that it's not worth. You know what I'm saying? So it's tricky. It's tricky.
But we also did say that in Howard's showroom, everybody's the same, you know, because he'll talk to everybody is important in that room, and that's I think was what's so special when we were shooting the scenes. And
Well, Howard's an egalitarian person.
You feel that, and so I don't know. It's and also just with Kevin, his performance is so amazing because he truly understands the game.
Well,
and that moment when he sets Howard straight, you're just like, oh, okay, I understand this. And when he says $1 million is more, it's just like.
Well, that's the moment
incredible.
we knew writing the script. We've a lot of time. That scene was probably written the most and edited the most.
And I remember
because it's the moment where Kevin's character gets to basically call bullshit. You know, like, hey, you know, I understand what you're getting at here, but $1 million is more. You know what I mean? And that's why it's such a deep scene, because not everything's being said there, but not everything's being said in life as we go through it. So and Kevin in particular, he really globbed onto that scene as well, and he wanted to spend time with it, and he wanted to, you know, add his pieces to, you know, to the scene, because again, like, here he is, you know, when I first started talking to him about, you know, history and stuff like that, he's like, you know, I never really got into history. I never really got into history of my people and stuff like that. And because I said to him, I said, the part of the reason why this character is so attracted to this opal is that it speaks to the history of the planet, of the cosmos, of the universe, and it also happens to be something from Africa. And he said that he's like, oh, it's interesting because I never really dug deep into it, but I feel an attraction to it. So that's something else he wanted to kind of bring to it, is that this kind of unknowing attraction to your history and what makes you feel special. So I don't know if I can answer that answer.
That's a good one. We got time for one more quick question, way in the back.
What was the question?
It was
The question was
how we
about,
worked with Sandler, right?
yeah, about how you worked with
How we
Adam
got his
Sandler, and
voice.
even actually how you helped him develop his voice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like the actual character's voice or the
Yeah.
accent, or
We followed a bunch of people in the district and kind of could hear different intonations of what New York sounded like from Long Island, from Brooklyn. So that was all in there, but we couldn't really describe what Howard's voice was, but every once in a while we would say to Sandler, that's not Howard enough, and he would get it and then tweak the accent to be right. And it was always a thing. It was because it was a hard line. There was Howard as a salesman. When Howard is speaking in a sales mode, he kind of gets a little bit more relaxed and things get a little bit more drawn out. And there were two different modes. When Howard's back in the back room, he's a totally different voice, you know. So there were moments of kind of
Howard with his family.
Yes, he has different modes and different kind of.
But a big part of when we were getting into the character, you know, we mentioned this legendary free speech person, Al Goldstein, who had a magazine called Screw and Midnight Blue, and there was a fuck the system mentality. I'm gonna beat it on my terms, even if they don't want me here. You know what I mean? That Al Goldstein brought to everything. So Al was an inspiration, and Rodney Dangerfield also was an inspiration. This fact that this guy's always on, and he's always looking to make people laugh and feel good, but there's a sadness there. You know what I mean? Like, Rodney Dangerfield wasn't in his first movie until he was 61 years old.
His whole thing is about getting
Think about
respect.
that happening this day and age.
That's all his thing is he gets no respect.
Becoming a movie star at 61. We're not like that anymore, weirdly. You know what I mean? It's a weird time. But those two people mixed with some of the people that we were trailing, there were these kind of guiding lights that were very, very helpful to us. And Sandler in particular, we would have one guy named Todd Volpio. We'd have him on set a lot, and he was kind of like our vibe ambassador. And he was a jeweler, and he would be on the set a lot, not in scenes, just kind of hanging around. I remember he brought like a client to our fake showroom once.
Really?
Yeah.
But he would
showing
use
jewelry in our fake showroom. I was like, dude, this is a set. Like, please.
Vibe ambassador. That's a job that I want, though.
he would use certain words.
It doesn't pay very well.
But he would use certain words to
No, it
describe merchandise, like, oh, that's very soft or milky, and those kind of words. They transferred how you'll pronounce them, you know. So
Yeah. That's great. Well, guys, thanks so much for coming out today to talk to us about the movie.
Yeah,
Josh,
thanks,
Benny,
everybody.
Daniel, Skip, thanks for a great discussion on Uncut Gems. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everybody. Appreciate it.